just hit the record button.
Well, welcome everybody to this introductory webinar for the CER Data Exchange Industry Co-Design Project. Next slide, thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. Today I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Next slide. Just a little bit of housekeeping for today's session. We are recording this webinar for folks that can't be here today, and we'll also share that recording and the slides on the AMO project website afterwards. We've got a lot of time for Q&A, so if you, we're going to organise that through Slido, so you can head on over to slido.com with that ID number there and start adding and upvoting questions. We'll try and get to all the questions. If we can't get to all the questions today, we'll definitely follow up. And if you want to reach us to ask even more questions, you can go to the CER Data Exchange at aemo.com.au email address there and get in touch with the team. So if just to make that all easier, if we could keep mics off until we get to Q&A, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a brand new project. So today we really just want to introduce it and we want to answer your questions about it, and we want to share how you can get involved. So we'll introduce who's involved, you know, why this project, what are we doing, how's it going to work. We've received quite a number of questions already, which is really great from folks out in industry. So we'll go through some of those questions up front. And then we'll talk about how you can get involved, and then we'll have some time at the end there for going through the Slido for extra questions. So without further ado, I think we'll probably jump to the next slide and launch into it. All right, and the next one, great, thank you. So the CER Data Exchange Industry Co-Design Project is a collaboration between AMO and AusNet and industry. We've supported with specialist project management and co-design expertise in Mott MacDonald. And so speaking to you from those project teams today is myself, Nick Regan, and my colleague Rachel Rodriguez-McGowan from AMO's Reform Delivery area. We have Anoop Nambiar, who's the DSO product owner at AusNet, and then Ed Chan and Craig Chambers from Mott MacDonald. I'd like to thank ARENA for supporting this project with funding, and as part of that application, we actually did quite a lot of work in engaging with some folks out there in industry about, you know, is this a project a good idea? What do you think? We actually received 10 letters of support from across a broad range of stakeholders, retailers, aggregators, consumer advocates, government, CR technology providers, some DNSPs. So, you know, for all of those who provided that support, we really appreciate it and thank you. Go to the next slide, please. So I'll just take us through a little bit of the why this project is a thing. So we're all part of energy transition. We all work on it every day. We're moving from the past, which is a one-way system reliant on a few large power plants where consumers are largely passive, to a future where there's many more generators with bi-directional flows of electricity. We've got more active consumers through CER. And that future is customer centric. It's flexible and dynamic. It's decarbonised. It has more decentralised decision making at scale. And so that, what I mean by that is, you know, we're seeing some of that today, but not at scale. You know, examples are retailers and VPP operators working with customers on how best to use and coordinate their CER. We also will have, you know, networks, managing more dynamic networks using more dynamic tools, and AMO operating a very different system. But we'll have all of those parties coordinating with each other to make sure that everything stays nice and secure and efficient. But for that to work, the future also needs to be data enabled. We'll go to the next slide, please. So we're data rich at the moment, but are we data enabled? Today we have, I guess, through just lack of any alternative, many different systems linked in and point-to-point integrations between organizations. There's not a lot of standardization in the data, the formats, the standards, and domestic evidence and international experience has shown that this is not going to work in a high CR system because it just creates cost and operational barriers. So the question this project is looking to answer with all of you in industry is, how can we do better than this? We'll go to the next slide, please. And so that domestic and international experience really highlights the benefits of taking a streamlined approach to data exchange between organizations. And that's to improve accessibility, transparency of data, reduce costs of accessing and exchanging that data between organizations. It helps enable greater CER coordination and all the benefits that can provide, and also supports innovation and customer choice. It does all those things to help enable CER to reduce energy costs for all consumers. And so that's what this project is seeking to achieve. Next slide, please. There are a range of different ways that you could do a more streamlined data exchange than point-to-point. These are some typical examples. All of these are up for consideration as part of this project, and we want to talk through options with industry. I guess the important part, though, is first defining what do we want this to do? What use cases? What is the data? What are our requirements? And consider things like privacy and cost, security, flexibility, latency. How are we going to get those things to work? That comes first and informs then how do you best implement those use cases. So go to the next slide. Thank you. So I wanted to share, what the project is, but also what it's not, because we've also got a lot of questions about that too. And so thought that would be helpful. So a few things that the CER Data Exchange project is not going to do. It's not seeking to design a data exchange that'll control consumer devices directly. It's really about enabling that organization to organization data exchange, networks, AMO, retailers, other customer representatives like aggregators. Aggregators are the ones that work with customers to coordinate their devices. It's not looking to duplicate or take over any existing participant functions. Retailers will remain fronts, VPPs will still coordinate CER, DNSPs will continue to manage their network and do DOEs and all this cool stuff that they're developing. The project's not trying to create a single master repository of all CER data out there. There is data out there. It's probably more about how we coordinate and share that data than trying to haul it all into one spot. The project is also, not trying to provide one way of doing it all. We want to work with everybody to understand what are the beneficial bits of data that need to be flowing through a streamlined exchange. I wouldn't have thought it would be every piece of data. And then finally, as I sort of touched on earlier, this project's about designing up what we want a streamlined data exchange, a national streamlined data exchange to do before we decide what technology would serve that purpose. So we're not deciding technology choices. It's about that high level design for what it needs to do, the job it needs to do for all of us. Next slide, please. Just really quickly on this one, we just wanted to highlight that Australia is not alone in thinking about this. Energy data exchanges exist or have been thought about in past projects or are being actively pursued globally in transport and EVs as well as in CER, providing opportunities to be coordinated and take cost out of the power system. Go next slide, thank you. And the other bit I wanted to add was just that we're also not unique in energy in thinking about this. Other industries have evolved from a point-to-point type approach to something that's more streamlined. And there are lots of examples, some here from finance, government, agri and health. Next slide, thank you. So what I wanted to share up front was, just in case anyone drops off the webinar early, how you can get involved. So the types of things we'll be talking about and wanting, to collaborate on with folks out there, what types of data should be going through this exchange. What are the use cases? How do we govern the data? How is it operated? Who owns it? How should it be funded? What does the design principles look like? All that sort of stuff. And so there'll be a variety of ways to get involved. Depending on how much time you want to commit to it, there'll be an expert working group that will be a smaller group that does a lot of thinking and quite a lot of heavy lifting on behalf of industry. There'll be some large all-in workshops to get a broad view of perspectives. And then for folks that can't participate in either of those methods, there'll be a public consultation round. But Ed will go into all of this in a lot more detail later. There will be a link in the pack that we send out on how to get registered and involved, but you've also got the email address too, so just feel free to reach out. Okay, I might go to the next slide, thank you. I'll go to the next slide and I'll hand to my colleague Rachel Rodriguez-McGowan, who'll take us, give us an overview of what the project's going to achieve.
Thanks very much, Nick, and good morning, everybody. What I want to touch on is, how does this project fit in Australia's CER integration journey? As we can see from the previous slides, international and domestic examples show that there is a need and a value for a CER data exchange. These examples have given us rich evidence-based results, and we've learned and spoken from industry, and the time for action is now, and we need to do this with industry. Instead of moving straight to implementation, we are taking this deliberate step to collaborate with industry on a high-level design and an implementation roadmap for a CER data exchange for the Australian context, so that what is implemented delivers the maximum amount of value for all customers, but also works with industry. Once we have alignment around this high-level design, we will move towards implementation and a detailed design during the next phase. Next slide, please. The project outputs are underpinned by the fundamental questions on our left. We will work and collaborate with industry stakeholders through working groups and open workshops to answer these questions. What are the use cases? What data should be governed? How will it be funded? Who owns and operates it? And what is our implementation approach? As mentioned, two of the key outputs will be an industry-aligned high-level design and an implementation roadmap. As we're preparing for implementation, we'll look to cost up the specific option that industry prefers, just to make sure it can be done. Another key thing we'll be looking to do throughout this project is drop knowledge sharing pieces throughout the project that synthesizes the discussions, feedbacks and advice that have come from industry, continually highlighting this transparent and inclusive co-design process. Next slide, please. I just want to reiterate again what Nick mentioned about what the CER data exchange project does not do. It will not directly control customer devices. It will not take over organisation existing functions. It will not create a single repository of CER data. It's not intended to be a monopoly. We'll need to work through what data goes through it, and that's what we'll talk to industry about. And also, most importantly, not to decide technology choices. That can only happen after we have a high-level design. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I'll now hand over to Ed Chan to talk about the co-design process.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see a lot of familiar names on the webinar. And for those of you who I haven't met before, I'm Ed Chan. I'm head of the Energy Advisory team at Mott MacDonald. And before I started with Mott, I've spent a fair bit of time at the AEMC and have worked on quite a number of these initiatives. So I'm very excited to be leading this process with the Mott team and supporting AEMO and AusNet on this. Now, before I move on to the slide, just a couple of logistic stuff. So you have seen that we've got Slido to take questions, and good to see many of you putting questions in. Please use the upvote button if there are things that you've seen that I've already posted there, and yeah, put your questions in, and we'll have a Q&A session live once we finish here. Next slide, please. I want to start just by saying a little bit about what we mean by co-design. I've been through a number of these co-design processes in my time at the energy sector, and also led a few of them. So for this one, we're really intending to lead a collaborative process. We are here to achieve an outcome, but I think it's being done through a collaborative process. One of the key learnings I had in the past is that we need to consider other parties' perspectives. So no one has all the answers here, and the reason AEMO and AusNet's running this process is we need to make this work for as many people as possible, and we need to consider all the other parties' perspective. Also important is to think about different options. I think Nick alluded to some of that in his early slides. There are various options available to achieve the outcome, and this process will need to consider that as well. And lastly, when you have a bunch of people working together, there would inevitably be some disagreements and different perspectives and so on, and we'll need to have some agreed principles on how we resolve those issues. So that's just a high level on how we think this needs to run, and that's certainly how I intend to run the co-design process with AEMO and AusNet. Next slide, please. Bit of a busy slide here, so I ask you for your patience. I'm going to take you through each part of it. So this is, in one slide, a view on how this process will run from end to end. So if I direct your attention to the left-hand side of the slide, where we are here, so project kickoff, that's now June, and this process is intended to run to November 2024. We've got 3 workshops, public workshops planned in the middle. July, August, and October are tentative dates, and those workshops will go through a number of things. So in the purple box below, we're looking at things like use cases, the actual exchange design options, interfaces, governance framework. So when we talk about governance, who owns it, who runs it, how it'll operate. So there's no preconceived idea as to whether one party would run it or not. And we also look at ownership of funding as well. I think I want to reinforce the other point I think that Nick and Rachel both made before is this process is about looking at high level design. So we're not going into the nitty gritty yet. There will be a stage after this where we would go into the detailed development. Going back to the top of this slide here, we've got a steering group and an expert working group. I'll talk to the expert working group a little bit later on. Part of this process will have a steering group with AEMO, AusNet, and ourselves being the project partners to just provide guidance, and that's the decision-making body for this work. A crucial part of this process is the expert working group, and I'll go to the next slide and talk about how the expert working group interacts with the workshop. Before that, we do have quite a few options for participation. So on the right-hand side here, we've got a link to forms for you to register your interest and also a QR code for you to scan. On the left-hand side, we've attempted to put a bit of a heat map. If you start from the top, you can certainly register for an email if you don't have a lot of time but want to just keep abreast of what's happening, how we're tracking. You can certainly receive emails. Those middle 2 boxes are for those people who like to provide some input but haven't got a lot of time. So we do have a public consultation process that will run towards, I think, the end of September, October. And that's a bit of a formal way to do things where you can read through the reports and the various artifacts that we produce and provide your input that way. It's a bit of a more formal way of doing things. As I said before, we also be running 3 industry workshops. So they are in-person workshops, and they are an opportunity for anyone who wants to come and listen to progress, provide your view, and we'll run breakout groups so that it won't just be one big room, everyone trying to talk. The last one is the expert working group. If there are people out here who have quite a bit of experience, lots of expertise, and like to be part of this design process, we would definitely want to hear from you. That's the most involved options, in that you're not merely just listening and hearing from people like me and Nick. We would actually invite you to be part of the working group to work out various options. Next slide, please. So focusing a bit on the expert working group, we're going to run it or split it into 4 work streams, so there will only be one group. Unlike other groups before, we won't run subgroups, because I think many people would be interested in all 4 of the topic area on the top left-hand corner there. So we'll split them up initially into scope and use cases, the governance, ownership and funding, and implementation roadmap. If during this process we decide that there are additional topics we need to spend a bit more time on, we are open to running more work stream or collapse them into smaller work streams. So it's quite flexible. I think the key is that we're only running one expert working group. Down below on the left-hand side, we are seeking broad representation from people with depth and breadth. So customer groups, industry associations, retailers, network businesses, OEMs, aggregators, market regulatory bodies as well. We will run a separate government consultation group so that we keep them informed of the process. We know how busy they are, and they probably don't have a lot of time to be part of the working group. Unfortunately, we won't be able to provide payment for working group members to attend. We are calling for volunteers for this one as well. On the right-hand side of the screen, with the expert working group, what we would like this group to do is actually support us in shaping the program. Topics for discussion as well. We are after your expert input, your insights. Many of you here on the call have spent many hours, many years looking at this stuff, so it'd be good to get your perspective. If you are part of the working group and you're from an organisation, we ask you to represent the view of the organisation, but also a cohort. For example, if you are a member of staff from a retailer, we would ask that you represent the view of the retail group as a whole, not just yourself or your organisation. We'll be asking you to stress test a lot of the work and work out a lot of the slides, a lot of the material together that we would use for workshops. So I'm sort of pretty forward in saying that we do want to work with people who put their hands up for the expert working group, so there is a fair bit of work to do, and I guess in return you get to have a pretty big say in how this is shaped. Next, please. So when you go under the form, you will find that there are 3 questions that we would put for you to answer. They are there, and they will be repeated in the form as well. If you have any questions, you want to know more, send us an email at the CER Data Exchange at aemo.com.au, and we would endeavour to give you a call or write you an email in response. Thanks. I think I talked a little bit about the public workshops and consult paper. I won't say too much on it. So they are in-person events for public workshops, breakout groups, and we'll definitely build upon contents that has already been developed by us and the expert working group. And on the consultation paper, it's more formal. It's a written response. For those of you who choose to take part in the consultation part, it's just to be upfront. This would be at the end, closer to the end of the process, so quite a few of the ideas may already be informed. So if you would like to provide your input early, I definitely encourage you to be part of the public workshops. Next. I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to Craig to answer a few stakeholder feedback. We've got some pre-prepared questions, and then we will go to a live Q&A after. Craig.
Thanks, Ed. Like Ed, I work at McDonald, and we're supporting AEMO and AusNet on this project. These are some pre-prepared questions. I've seen a number of people been talking on LinkedIn and other platforms in regards to some of your questions. So just To kick off things, I think we've got about half an hour for Q&A, and to echo what Ed said, I see a number of people are putting questions into Slido. Please upvote those for those that you want to hear responses on, and we will look to consolidate many of these responses into an FAQ that will be shared after the meeting. Okay, so these are some of the questions that we've seen on the LinkedIn channels and other feedback that we've got already to open the batting. And I'll just whip through these and ask people in the steering group just to respond. So the first one is, how will customers benefit from the exchange? And I think, Ed, I was going to direct that one to you.
Thanks, Craig. This work will benefit customers in the long run. I think I don't want to sound sort of skirting around the answer, in that the concept of a data exchange is about creating efficiencies within all the systems that we have now. There are benefits where you've got new players or even existing players who can have a lower cost of integration and sharing the data. So it's not going to be a direct benefit, and I think a lot of people would say, well, if it's not a direct benefit, why would do it? I think it is definitely still worthwhile, because data is so important in a high CER world, and customers could still be involved, could still get benefit through the design, how we design this process and how all they get the information. But that's a later part of the project.
Okay, thanks. So, Nick, I'm going to direct this one to you. The aggregators and O&Ms are obviously interested in this data exchange, and probably interested in, how they would participate, what it's going to cost. Are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So as we sort of see more CER being implemented in the system, the importance of aggregators and OEMs is growing as well. They're playing an increasingly important role in the power system markets, and in some of those off-market services that they provide to retailers or networks. So and a lot of these parties aren't registered in the market today, and so we see them very much as one of the participants in this type of arrangement, because whether they're a registered participant or not, they still need to coordinate with other organisations in the industry, and they want to do that, or so they've told us, at low cost, which makes sense. So a good outcome for this project would be making it easier for these organisations to exchange data with other industry organisations, to help scale their service offering. So to be able to provide some of the services to retailers, networks, and others that help them obviously at lower cost do that, but raise their revenue opportunities, which means more value shared with their customers. And that means sort of more CER coordination and benefits for all customers. So we'll be I really hope that there are some aggregators and OEMs in the working group to give us sort of some in-depth input into how best this can serve those outcomes. But yeah, workshop 1 will be a lot about use cases and the roles everybody plays within those use cases.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So I'm going to try and kill two birds with one stone. I see one of the first questions that Peter Kilbury's put forward on Slido is a lot of what has been presented is a centralised exchange, and Project Edge, CBA indicated similar value from a decentralised approach. Nick, can you talk further about why we're considering a centralised exchange?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Peter, for the question, and for giving the Project Edge stuff a read. It's good to see. So I guess a centralized exchange isn't our starting position. Just make that clear. The evidence from Edge or even internationally, if you look at some of those other countries we looked at earlier, is sort of the premise of it not being point to point and bespoke. It's about having something that's not scalable. Something streamlined is more scalable. And so there are a lot of options for that we want to work through with you. Some of those diagrams we had on the slide earlier were just examples. Decentralized is certainly on the table. But yeah, we're not starting with the assumption that this is centralized, and we need to make sure when we're working through this together that we separate out data exchange from control or operations, and we just really focus on how do we facilitate that efficient ecosystem of systems. That's what we're looking to do. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Peter.
Thanks, Nick. So we've got a question. One of the questions that came back, who's going to own and operate this? I think there was a number of questions around this on LinkedIn. Anoop, are you able to shed some light on this question?
Yes, certainly, Craig. So particularly from a DNSP, or distribution network or service provider perspective, part of what we're trying to do with this exercise is get some workable options as to what that governance and ownership model looks like. The reason we are sort of supporting this work is because in the absence of something like this, the risk is that everyone's going to end up doing their own thing. It becomes really difficult and expensive to do the data sharing that we know we will need to do in a NEM that's significantly supported by distributed energy resources. So who will own and operate the exchange? Well, as we work through these this process, I think we can put out some options and see what works best for customers. At the end of the day, we have statutory bodies that own and operate things. We have, sort of individual businesses that can do that. So we're not going into this exercise with a necessarily preconceived notion that, our AEMO is going to run it, or, we're going to assign a third party to run it and own it. I think what we're trying to say is we recognize the need for an exchange like this. So let's have a discussion on how best we can set it up, including ownership, governance, and all that goes along with it. So personally, I think we're going into this process with a fairly open mind. But the outcome we are seeking is, what's in the best interest of consumers.
Okay. Thanks, Anoop. I might direct the next one to you as well. So a lot of work has happened over the last few years to develop up the 2030.5 IEEE standard for Australia through CCIP-Oz. Are you able to talk about how CCIP-Oz is different or is complementary to this?
Yeah, and this is an understandable sort of question, and we've heard this even previously. Now, it goes back to that initial piece today where we set out what this is and isn't. So CCIP-Oz is a device level protocol, and we do need standardization there. And we've got so the first version effectively being used, for example, with Backstop in Victoria and getting broadly adopted. That's important, that's necessary. So that's a device level protocol. I think what we're trying to do with this piece of work is recognize that there is another level above that relates to market use cases, that enables services for that lead to customer choice and support the operation of the NEM in an enduring way. So that gap we haven't covered. So the protocol, the device level protocol, is extremely important, but that doesn't directly link to the market. So there is a piece in the middle, which is what we're trying to address. And again, if you look at that ESB final report, so signed off by the heads of all the peak bodies, priority number 2, this is the report that came out in Fed, clearly calls out this gap, that effective and efficient sharing of data. So, about the device level protocol, the market service oriented data is critical. So that's the distinction. So the CER relates really to that device level layer. And this is the layer above that, which is really the services layer, if you want to call it that way, or market services layer.
Thanks, Anoop. Nick, will AEMO be taking a blockchain approach? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I can answer that. No is the answer. The project's not deciding technology choices, as sort of Rachel talked about, and we mentioned at the top. Before anyone can talk about detailed design or technology, we need to define what it is that a CER data exchange for organization to organization data exchange needs to do. We need to answer questions like, what are the design principles? What are the use cases? The data governance, operation ownership, funding, all of that stuff that Anoop talked to. So this project is doing that with industry. It's saying, how does that need to look to best suit Australia and Australia's energy industry? So this isn't looking at blockchain or any other technology.
Okay, thank you. So there's a few questions also in Slido, which I'm going to go on to, is how this relates to other things underway. Starting with dynamic operating envelopes, Anoop, could you comment on how the exchange could interface with dynamic operating envelopes?
Yeah, certainly. So if you look at, again, going back to that point of this exchange being that layer above things like CER, which is about exchanging market level information. Having a common standardized, very low barrier to entry way to access things like dynamic operating envelopes. All dynamic operating envelopes are really sort of signals to market sense to aggregators, effectively aggregators, to apply to end customer devices to provide them with better outcomes in terms of access to network capacity. So you could do that in a bespoke way. And if you look at emergency backstop in Victoria, again, a version of that, a one-sided version of that is what we are implementing for, extreme minimum system load scenarios. But if you look at it from a market perspective, I think it's fair to say you want an easy, standardized way, while, and also a secure way to provide that information. And so, one use case for an exchange like this is to be that that common layer, the default way to provide that. And so DOEs could be and would be, I would imagine, a data set that is exchanged, on a hub like this.
Thanks, Anoop. So there's a few questions in the chat that I'm going to group into this question to you, Nick. So Warwick Johnson asks about how this relates to the DR register. We've seen questions in regards to how does this relate to flexible trading relationships. I think there's also the Foundation Strategic Initiative that Jill asks as well. Are you able to talk about how some of these other initiatives that AEMO has underway and how they might relate to this?
Yeah, happy to, and thanks for the questions. So Warwick, the relationship between this concept and the DR register is that the CER data exchange is just that. It's meant to be the exchange that connects, efficiently connects the organizations with the industry. Now, as part of the use cases, the integration is one part of making data exchange work, but you also need identity verified, and you also need perhaps standing data to reference. And so as part of the working through the use cases with everybody, I would imagine that the DR register probably feeds into some of those use cases via the exchange. And we can even talk about whether there needs to be additional information in there to facilitate some of these CER coordination use cases. So that's kind of how it fits. This DR register is about having the standing data there. The exchange is about connecting everybody in an efficient way, and the two should be able to interplay to facilitate those use cases. How it relates to, I might go to Jill's question. How it relates to the FASI, that's a really good question. So the AEMO IDX project is looking to streamline exchange between industry participants, but it's looking broader than just DER. So, you know, I think out of the metering services review, power quality data is one of those things that will be, you know, put through there. Some other system security, you know, contracts and enablement will go through there. And I know industry has been talking about, you know, migrating some of those other, you know, B2B and B2C retail transactions, EMMS data, you know, all those sorts of other cross-industry use cases in time. Why this project is here, talking about organization data exchange for CER, is because throughout Project Edge, we talked a lot about the concept of, you know, we called it a data exchange hub for more streamlined data exchange between industry organizations and coordination. And we listened to the feedback. There was feedback, like Anoop said, that, you know, AEMO could be one party that runs something like that. Another option is a jointly owned industry hub. You know, those are things that stakeholders have raised, and we think it's only fair to work through those options with everybody. Using IDX for CER data exchange is also an option that's on the table, but I think we should work through all of those options and weigh them up side by side with everybody before we, you know, decide which way it should go. So that's sort of the relationship there. Flexible trading arrangements, I think, was the other part of the question. So that rule change, or unlocking CR benefits through flexible trading, is seeking to enable flexible CR resources to participate in the market directly. This might mean, I guess, in relation to the CR data exchange, that there are more industry participants that need to be coordinated with and between, and whom could provide CR-based flexibility services to other organisations as well as in market. And so having something like CR data exchange that has that foundation of identity and standard data and standardized integration to keep barriers low for those parties to enter the market is important. The CR data exchange project's not really dependent on that rule change going through, but in that situation we had a lot more participants wanting to enter the market and interact with each other, then it's useful by bringing down cost barriers and providing more revenue opportunities for them. Yeah, so hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, all right. Might start with you, Anoop. You know, as a network business, what's driving your participation and you know, focus on this project?
Sure, thanks, Craig. In simple terms, we think this is important because our customers expect us to be doing work on it. I think, and we saw this when we were doing the Edge trial, and we see this every day in terms of feedback we get from customers and customer groups. So in simple terms, you know, as a regulated business, you know, serving customers to provide an essential service and increasingly the sole source of energy, I think it would be amiss of us to not progress and be part of this, you know, and push forward effective CEI integration. But in addition, so that's I think, you know, a fair summary statement. This is in the interest of our customers. We believe that it is to progress this work, not to a particular design or outcome, but to work on it, because it's definitely a gap. And if we don't do something about it, customers will, incur costs, whether direct costs or costs associated with reliability and resilience. But more, I suppose, foundationally, this CER integration is not really an option. I mean, it's happening whether we like it or not, right? So you've got climate change pushing it, you've got technology making it easier, you've got economics driving it, you've got, AIM or ISP is clear about, coal exiting earlier than we expected, greater reliance on CER. So it's that opportunity and challenge piece. I do think it's in everyone's interest to try to get in front of it, because we are behind it, and we see this again, this emergency backstop and sort of initiatives like that. As far as customers are concerned, it's it's all stick, not enough carrot, right? And what we're trying to do here is provide a platform that allows those incentives to flow through, allows customers choice, allows for better value creation through all of these CER assets. And I personally, I believe that this initiative, along with many others that we're pursuing, supports that.
Thanks, Anu. So I really want to get to Slido. Ed, can you just quickly answer the last question there? I think AEMO's already talked about why they're involved in the program, so I'm going to, in the interest of time, get to participants' questions. Ed, the risk is that we create something for Australia that doesn't integrate with the world. How are we going to think about that?
That question will be top of mind, I think, for all of our process. We don't want to create an Australian-specific framework. It's the short answer, given there's so many things happening around the world. We're exploring the concept and the high-level design, but keeping that not creating additional rail gauge issue. It's what we need to avoid.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to jump to Slido, and I might try and group a few questions just in the interest of time. So Danny and Tim talk about what's the problem we're trying to solve and what's the objective here. I'm wondering, Nick, could you look to I think the participants are a little feel like it's been a bit vague in regards to what the objective is here and the problem we're trying to solve. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, fair. That's good feedback too. Thank you, everyone. We'll make sure that's up in lights before we send this out. So the problem is we as an industry need to get CER integrated and coordinated. As Anoop touched on, we are drifting towards a web of point-to-point interactions to do that. That's been shown to not help see us achieve that goal of CER coordination at scale and all the benefits it brings. So that's the problem we're trying to solve, is what does an efficient CER data exchange look like for Australia that can help CER integration by making organisation to organisation data exchange efficient. That's what it is. What does that need to look like in Australia?
Thanks for that. Tim, I see you got your hand up. If it's a very quick one, I'm happy to open up the mic, but really want to make sure we give time to everyone else. So,
really quick, I'm just wondering, that control objective doesn't seem to address the consumer making their choice and their agency. And I'm just wondering about thinking of the broadcast data being sent out to consumers that says, here's the price, here's your dynamic operating envelope, and them taking action and then gathering what that action is, rather than necessarily trying to make business opportunities for aggregators or virtual peaking plants or otherwise.
Thanks, Tim. I think that's a good segue to the next question. I think Matthew asks, what's in it for customers? Who'd like to take that one? I think Ed mentioned that before, but Nick, do you want to, or Anoop, do you want to comment on that?
I can really quickly. Anoop, sorry, you riff on probably what I'll miss. So, and to pick up on what Tim said, so this is all about voluntary CER coordination. I think when we say CER integration, it's voluntary. Customers can choose to be part of VPPs or not. Customers will choose different things. Some customers will just want to have wholesale exposed retailer deal, and some will just want to have dynamic export limits, and that's okay. It's about providing options to end customers. What this CR data exchange is aiming to do is make it as efficient as possible for those organisations who serve customers to be able to provide those options at low cost. And so what is in it for customers? Well, CR coordination will save power system costs for just all consumers. But for those who have CER and choose to participate in these VPPs and things, there's extra revenue there that they can use to reduce their bills. So that's what it's about and how it benefits customers.
Yeah, I might just add a sort of emphasize what Nick's saying. So the point of this is not to directly enable customers, because what we've seen in the Edge trial and in all of the customer work we've done as part of that and others, is that at least in this stage of the energy transition, you need to enable customer agents, because customers, the cognitive burden and the requirements to individually respond to things like what you're saying, to whether it's pricing or DOEs, that doesn't really work. You need agents that are enabled, and the problem right now is commercial viability of those sort of service businesses is difficult because the cost of integration can be significant. So the idea is that something like this allows for those intermediaries to more cost effectively offer services. So that's the intention. And again, you can look at it in a similar way to what we've seen in the retail contestability space, right? How we made it easier over the years for new retailers to come in. I mean, that's sort of an analog that I use anyway. Sorry, you had your hand up again.
So Tim, I'm not going to jump back to you. I'm more than happy to have the team maybe chat to you later. But I really want to give everyone the opportunity that have put time into Slido. So sorry, we're just going to respond on the Slido. It's a bit more efficient and democratic than everyone putting their hands up. So the next question from Emily is around consumer data right and how will the exchange relate or interact with that? Who'd like to respond on that one?
I'm happy to. Thanks, Emily. So this kind of talks to some of that customer enablement questions as well. So the consumer data right is about getting sort of customer information to them, through their representatives, as Anoop sort of talked to. This is slightly different in that this is about enabling organisations. It's not about sharing individual customer information. It's things like, dynamic limits or trading services, flexibility services between organisations for, to provide value to those customers who CER are being employed to do that. So consumer data right is a lot about enabling customers with their usage data. This is more about helping coordination for market-based services between organisations. Will there be interaction? That's a really good question. Let's work through it in the use cases. I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks. So I might direct this one to you, Ed. Richard Owens talks about how we're going to consult on how the data exchange is, whether it's needed, the scope and objectives, how it will be implemented, who decides, and are there, for example, a need for rule changes?
I'll start from the back. Do we need rule changes? Maybe, we don't know. Part of this process is to find out whether there are, whether we will need regulatory changes. If we do, one of the outputs or next step for this project is scope that rule change together. And in terms of whether we're consulting on whether data exchange is needed and in scope and objective, I think the answer is we are, for this project, proceeding on the basis that yes, we do need something like a data exchange. What it looks like, what it is, how that's what this process is designed to do.
Thanks, Ed. Mike Bradley asked, what's the time commitment from the expert working group? I might direct that one to you again, Ed. Can you talk to that?
We're planning to have a fortnightly cadence for the expert working group, and what that means is the group will meet at the start on a 2-week cadence, probably an hour and a half each, and then we would just tailor that as time goes on. What we expect the expert working group members to do, at least in the initial stage, is just to get a better understanding of what we're trying to do, and then as the project goes on, we will be asking members to do some prep work. It's not designed to be an onerous thing where you have to write us numerous pages of things. It's really about providing your insights, helping us shape discussion and so on.
So the next one I might direct to you, Anoop. So Project Edge looked at cybersecurity risks around a decentralized hub as the best approach. A centralized hub could create a single point of failure. You able to comment on that?
Yeah, it's and this is where it gets a little bit complicated to explain when we talk about centralized hub versus decentralized hub, and there's an aspect of this that relates to IT and comms infrastructure. So if you say it's all sitting in one data center and being run out of one location, okay, isn't that a single point of failure? Of course it is. So, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we are fundamentally talking about is having a standardized common way to exchange information. The way it's implemented can mitigate risks around single points of failure, right? That's more about how it's implemented. But the concept of a single arrangement doesn't necessarily mean it's a single thing that can break. It just means you've got a common language and a common understanding of how to exchange this data. So I would draw that distinction. When we talk about a centralized data exchange, it's not a technical one monolith that sits somewhere that can break or get hacked, because that is, there are many ways to mitigate that. That's an IT architecture, that's an implementation design thing. What we're talking about here is the arrangement. So, hopefully that clarifies why it's not quite right to say that having a common arrangement then makes it a single point of failure. It's not that.
Thanks, Anoop. So Tim, I see you've got a question there regarding Project Edge. If you've got a question specifically on Project Edge, maybe if you could direct that to Anoop and Nick or the project team separately. Where it's Project Edge is obviously a feeder project, as is Symphony, as is a number of the other projects that are ongoing, but I'd rather stay on the topic of what we're talking about today. So Alana asks, the CER is looking at a consumer-centric approach. What's the plan for consumers' involvement in the co-design process? Ed, do you want to comment on that?
For this process, we'll certainly be keen to talk with consumer advocacy group like PIAC and all the other ones that have been very much engaged in this process. This is not a process where we would be able to have individual consumer involvement given the technical nature of it. But through the workshops, through the working groups, we have things like use cases. I think the use case is primarily the area where we consider how we make sure that this exercise does address the consumer aspect. That's the way that we would do it. I'm happy to talk to you, Alana, afterwards on how we can work together on that. And I'm very conscious that consumer advocacy groups have a lot on their plate and may not have the ability to fully engage.
Okay, so I see there's still a few questions in here. I might just take one more and then we'll just wrap up, given we're almost at the end of our time. So there's a question here. From what I can tell, the data is covered by DR register and CSIP standards. Can AEMO clarify why these two existing mechanisms should not be applied? Nick, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, happy to. certainly not saying they don't apply. I think we did cover sort of how they relate earlier, so that'll be on the recording, but it'll also be through the project. CCIP is a sort of 2-device comms kind of standard, and consumer data right is about consumers' consumption data being accessible through their customer representatives. This is all about it's different data. So it's about how do you facilitate organization to organization data exchange for them to be able to coordinate and provide services. So, limits, service opportunities to support retailers by VPPs or network congestion, or even to have market prices easily able to be ingested are all types of use cases that this project is focusing on.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Nick. I'll hand back to you to wrap us up.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Craig. And thanks everyone for your questions. There's still a lot of questions there, so we'll make sure we answer those for you. And just really appreciate your interest in attending and some really good, well-informed questions there. So I think it's going to be a very productive process. Again, there's a number of ways you can get involved. Please register your interest if you want to be part of the working group or the workshops. And yeah, just really looking forward to working with everybody over the rest of the year. So thanks. Have a good Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.